In 1943, during the 400th anniversary remembrance of Copernicus' death, a Chinese man was selected among 10 of the greatest revolutionaries who contributed to the modern world, along with Albert Einstein and Henry Ford. His name is Yan Yangchu, known to the world as Dr. James Yan, a global pioneer in mass education in the 20th century. Dr. Yan was born in 1890 in southwestern China. He grew up during China's turbulent late Qing era, marked by internal decline, Western imperialism, and growing missionary influence. His childhood impressions of coolies carrying heavy loads for meager wages fueled his passion for helping the masses. At 13 years old, he attended a missionary school and became a Christian. He later enrolled at the University of Hong Kong before studying at Yale University. Dr. Yan's mass education journey did not start in China, but in France. After graduating from Yale in 1918, Dr. Yan moved to France to join World War I with the YMCA of North America, serving as an interpreter for Chinese laborers supporting frontline troops. Witnessing their isolation and mistreatment, Dr. Yan began teaching illiteracy by simplifying Chinese characters and publishing the newspaper Chinese Laborers Weekly. Through his efforts, 200,000 Chinese laborers became literate. His World War I experiences made him reflect on the potential of the masses.
When I first saw him in the Philippines, he told me, but almost word for word, what he'd said before. For the first time in my ignorant intellectual life, I realized the power of the common man. You couldn't build a nation from the top down. You had to build it from the bottom up.
Dr. Yan reflected in a 1944 conversation with the Nobel Prize winner Pearl Buck. I determined to use my life to free the poor people from their bitterness and help them develop their strength. The idea of starting a mass education campaign came to him. After World War I, Dr. Yan earned his master's degree from Princeton University. In 1920, Dr. Yan returned to China and began to head a national mass literacy campaign under the Chinese National YMCA in Shanghai. In 1922, Dr. Yan published a textbook, 1,000-character primer. An ordinary illiterate Chinese studying an hour a day for 4 months could learn 1,000 characters, which is enough to read simple books. The textbook quickly became popular in China. Over 3 million copies were sold. Professor Edward Sapir at the University of Chicago commented on the 1,000-character approach as culturally and psychologically sound. In 1923, the U.S. held the World Conference on Education, calling for removing illiteracy from all countries. Dr. Yan seized the opportunity and founded the National Association of Mass Education Movement, serving as its general director. By 1928, approximately 5 million people received education from 100,000 teachers, including Mao Zedong, who later became the Chinese Communist Party leader.
Mao said that if you're going to organize China, you've got to take advantage of the poor peasants. So he and James Yan went to the countryside at about the same time. They were both looking for the power to change things.
Recognizing that 85% of the Chinese population resided in villages, Dr. Yan shifted focus from cities to rural areas in 1929.
So if you were going to build the people from the bottom up, that's where you had to go.
He selected Ding County, 200 miles south of Beijing, as the experiment site. Ding County had a population of over 400,000 at that time. Dr. Yan moved his family to Ding County, and influenced by him, more than 500 intellectuals joined him.
One of the farmers came up to Dr. Yan and said, "I'm glad to be able to read, but my stomach is just as empty as my ignorant neighbors." But they very quickly realized that literacy by itself didn't change that much. It was a good thing, to be sure, but it didn't change that much.
Dr. Yan identified the 4 weaknesses of Chinese rural problems as illiteracy, poverty, disease, and misgovernment. To address these issues, his team published stories and educational materials covering agriculture, health, and science. They fostered farmer cooperatives, disseminated agricultural knowledge, and enhanced techniques, seeds, and livestock breeds. They established a structured system deploying health workers to villages, effectively controlling smallpox and addressing skin diseases.
His model of this local health program was very influential in China and around the world.
Dr. Yan worked with other reformers to form a national rural reconstruction movement, seeking ways to tackle political issues like taxation, land ownership, and corruption. This movement followed the trend of going to the people after the 1919 May 4th movement. Several provinces adopted Dr. Yan's approach to the county-based reconstruction. One of the challenges for Dr. Yan's team was a lack of financial support. For example, they had to make with radio receivers themselves.
They couldn't afford hypodermic needles. So they took regular pins and sterilized them and used those.
Moreover, international skepticism challenged their efforts. The League of Nations questioned the experiment's national applicability. Dr. Yan asserted that the goal was to develop a county unit system of rural reconstruction that could be applied throughout China. Unfortunately, the vigorous rural reconstruction movement in China was disrupted by the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937.
With the Japanese invasion in 1937, the question then became, how do you keep China alive? Rural reconstruction drops from the national agenda.
Despite the war disruption, Dr. Yan persisted. In 1940, he established the Rural Construction College in China's wartime capital, Chongqing, where he served as principal, furthering his commitment to rural reconstruction. The mass education movement Dr. Yan led in China was a turning point on so many levels. First, it left a long-lasting legacy in Ding County. According to the county record in 1980s, because of the Ding County experiment, there was no literacy in the population, and smallpox had totally vanished. Secondly, the Ding County experiments reshaped rural reconstruction in China by pioneering independent research and reform strategies ahead of government initiatives. It developed innovative social reforms that did not rely on Chinese nationalists or communists.
The Ding Xian experiment had shown that you don't have to have a violent peasant revolution in order to improve things drastically. Building financial support for farmers, giving them access to better seeds and grain, health programs, all these things are not especially revolutionary.
On the international level, Dr. Yan's pioneer work transformed the mass education into an international cause by actively engaging the global community from the beginning. In 1925, he attended the inaugural Institute of Pacific Relations held in Honolulu, Hawaii. In 1927, he visited the U.S. to seek support from the Rockefeller Foundation, which became the biggest donor to his campaign. In the 1930s, sponsored by the International YMCA, Dr. Yan conducted an 8-month trip to investigate rural reconstruction problems in the USSR, Finland, Poland, Yugoslavia, Denmark, Sweden, England, and the USA. These international activities allowed Dr. Yan to promote his mass education concept to the world. In 1947, Dr. Yan delivered an address to UNESCO, advocating that mass education and rural reconstruction were not peculiar to China, but a world problem. Mass education became integrated into UNESCO's global mission of fundamental education.
Fundamental education, what the United Nations programs were based around. That phrase came from China.
In the early 1950s, Dr. Yan expanded his mass education and rural development efforts to Thailand, India, Colombia, Guatemala, and Ghana, earning him the title Brother of International Mass Education. His community-based approach gained popularity in many developing nations. In 1960, he established the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction in the Philippines, fostering global training for village workers and focusing on long-term sustainable solutions to building resilient rural communities. Dr. Yan received the 1960 Raymond Magsaysay Award for his efforts in tackling enduring Asian issues. In 1987, President Reagan honored him with the End Hunger Lifetime Achievement Award. Dr. Yan passed away in 1990 at 96 years old, but his legacy persisted. Dr. Yan's dedicated efforts in mass education in the 20th century, which originated in France and developed in China, transformed the methods to tackle poverty, illiteracy, disease, and rural development. Today, his innovative path to empowerment and equality based on education and community-led reforms remains at the heart of rural reconstruction projects in the world. China's new rural reconstruction movement, emerging in the late 1990s, embraced his ideas to confront rural challenges of globalization. Dr. Yan's impactful story endures, inspiring ongoing changes for a more sustainable world.